Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're here today. This is what it's all about. It's the music. I know that you'll be sick and tired listening to me anyway before the music starts. But however, anyway, Fitzmaurice was born in Dublin on the 6th of January 1898. Along with his parents, he arrived in Portlaoise, then Marlborough, at the age of 4. He wrote, "From infancy, I had always been regarded as a somewhat strange sort of bird, swayed mostly by impulse. Thanks to the Christian brothers, I entered the battle of life well equipped and with a sound secondary education, a tough stubbornness and grim determination to succeed." Well, after school, he would often amble past the adjacent Aldrich's motor garage, right beside the CBS, and take a peek through the open door. One day, Louis Aldrich spotted the googly-eyed young boy at the door, and inviting him in, he proceeded to show him around. The 11-year-old James Fitzmaurice was fascinated by what he saw. "To my youthful mind, this workshop was more wonderful than Aladdin's cave," he wrote. "My friend and mentor, I soon was to learn, had become smitten with the flying bug. I watched him as he set to work on the construction of a flying machine, and young as I was, I became one of his keenest disciples, when everyone else believed he was just plain nuts." It was a labour of love and was finally completed. With great ceremony, it was wheeled to the largest meadow in the vicinity. The little motor was started up as it stood poised, head into the wind, for that impatiently awaited moment, the takeoff. Never before had the inhabitants of our small town reached such a feverish pitch of excitement, slowly gathering momentum. The little plane, it took off, it hurtled across the meadow, but shortly after it became airborne, what happened? It came down. It crashed ignominiously, he said. "I had watched this crude contraption take shape and reach its tragic end," he wrote, "but I had actually seen it airborne, and my boyish enthusiasm became inflamed. From that moment on, I decided that this new art of flying would be my foremost interest in life." That was in 1912, and it was only a few short years after the Wright brothers. It was the epiphany that sent him on the road to fame as a world-famous aviator. And this opening segment of Movement 1, Stargazer, depicts the young Fitzmaurice staring into the night sky with a sense of wonder, as he imagines what it would be like to fly. Then comes his epiphany, his introduction into the world of aviation, which was still in its infancy. In the autumn of 1915, World War I is gathering momentum. Fitz, like many of his other young people, friends, were led to believe that being in the army and going to war would be a thrilling experience. It was as if he had fallen headlong into hell. He said, "Never before had I seen a dead person. My whole being and soul was filled with dread and disgust." Fitz's battalion started out with 850 men, and he was one of the 21 that somehow survived. Fitz's bravery and leadership qualities became apparent during these months of death and desolation at the front, and he received a commission in acknowledgement. When the opportunity came to join the Royal Flying Corps, the forerunner to the RAF, he welcomed it with open arms. He was posted to a unit at the front on the 11th of November 1918, Armistice Day. So he just missed out on aerial combat. Movement 2 comes to a close with the piece Courage. And Fitz wrote about courage. In the test of battle, every normal man is not only frightened, he is almost petrified with fear. The greater the imagination, the greater degree of fear suffered. Courage is nothing more than the conquest and suppression of fear, or the development of a degree of willpower which is capable of rising to supreme heights. It is sustained by a standard of discipline. Movement 2. Thanks, Mark.
earlier, the Brennan was not Fitz's first attempt to cross the Atlantic. The Princess Xenia had been used on the first transatlantic attempt. It was named after the wife of the millionaire, Billy Leeds, a New York billionaire, who was funding the attempt. So if you're going to fund it, you get the right to name it and call it whatever you like. His fellow pilot on that flight, Captain Robert Henry McIntosh, was one of the most experienced aviators of his day. As Teddy pointed out, 5.5 hours later, they landed on Ballybunion Strand. But remember, so many people had been killed attempting to cross the Atlantic. They were quite happy to be back in Ballybunion Strand, and I believe the reception they got there was also held its own delights, so they were happy enough. That also signalled, though, the arrival of winter that year, so that was the end, the last attempt that year for crossing the Atlantic. The piece continues then with Razzmatazz, playing on the time, the 20s. Fitz resigned anyway from the force, and in 22 returned to an Ireland in turmoil. He described the Ireland he had returned to as God's own country, populated by the devil's own people. There was an attitude, I suppose, towards remembering all the pilots with experience who came in, returned home to Ireland, had flown in the RAF. They weren't home trained. They hadn't taken part in the revolution. So were by and large looked down and found it difficult enough at the time. So that attitude played out for a long, long time. But remember, in most dark periods, there's also light. And for Fitz, this came in the form of love. Fitz met and fell in love with a petite, non-commissioned officer in the Women's Royal Air Force. So this movement celebrates Fitz's wife, Violetta, or Bill as he referred to her, and their young, deep love. Fitz himself wrote, "Our early association and eventual marriage were filled with the spice of romance, and she has been my inspiration and is responsible, to a great extent, for the successes of the many adventures which I have undertaken." Such sentiments deserve to be put to music.
We're starting with the Razzmatazz, not the love song. Yes, you can please do. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Destiny Day, the 12th of April 1928. Fitz, along with Captain Cole and Baron von Hunfeld, who was funding it, awaited the takeoff from Baldonnel. And sometimes it's best to go to source. What Fitz himself, his memories of the time. The motor seemed to gulp ravenously at the sudden flow of gasoline through the carburettor into the cylinders. With a roar, the propeller flashed through the air, ripping a mighty wind over the wings and back against the tail. The wheels began turning, and we both gripped the control column. Faster and faster, we gained momentum. The tail rose as she assumed the flying position, but still held to the ground by lack of speed. Fortunately, sufficient speed was obtained, and we managed to rise the machine off the ground and rose to the air. He could picture his old friends returning from Baldonnel and the journey back to the city, and his darling Bill returning to their daughter Pat. Remembering that his last memory had been a kiss and a smile with "Good luck, Fitz, I know you'll make it." The early part of the flight was relatively peaceful and easy, but you'll note a shift, two more ominous sounds, as night falls and the weather takes a turn for the worst, seriously for the worst. This becomes a very dramatic encounter, which the piece picks up, as night falls and they're tossed around violently, thinking the plane will break into pieces at any moment, flying up over clouds to get their bearings and back down again to sea level so that they could make some headway. Fitz describes the white water of the ocean waves as reaching up to them like fingers of a devil trying to pull them down into watery tombs. Pitch darkness all around, flying close to the surging waves. We realized the danger. We climbed to 6,000 feet, but the cold was intense. The fog and the sleet wrapped around us like the clinging hand of fate. It was a battle of man and man-made instrument against the elements. What a struggle. Pains and aches seemed to surge through my body. My eyes felt as though someone had thrown sand in them. Cole, too, would occasionally lift his goggles to rub his bloodshot eyes. In this fitful stretching, showed that he too was suffering cramped, aching, tired muscles. They were down to their last 2 hours of fuel and would have loved to have somewhere to land, but couldn't find anywhere. And then, at a particular time, there was a shout that there's a ship. The ship turned out to be a lighthouse. The fog cleared and they saw the lighthouse in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, as it happens, Greenlee Island. They landed beside it. They had actually flown further than Baldonnel to New York because of their diversion north. So they had proved that it could be done. On landing, the ice that they landed on, unfortunately, collapsed underneath them and the aircraft was damaged. But they were safe and well. After 36 and a half hours, they landed at Greenlee Island. They were international heroes. Tours of America, ticker tape parades, all that followed. It was a historic achievement, not just for aviation, but gave them, everybody, hope for the future. And on that, it's time for music.
story of the flight of the Brennan captured the public's imagination on both sides of the Atlantic. After a triumphant tour of the US cities, the airmen returned to a sounding welcome in Europe. What a reception they got, say in New York. New York, when Fitzmaurice and his two German friends were received in New York, they got a reception even bigger than Colonel Lindbergh, their own All-American, had got the year before. Back in Europe, it was also fantastic. Fitzmaurice got the freedom of Dublin, which was very important to him because he was born in Dublin after all, and Dublin is our capital as well. A month later, he became the first chairman of the Irish Aero Club, so that set Irish aviation on a commercial basis off in the best possible way. He was its first chairman. He harboured plans for making the country a key player in the exciting new world of civil aviation, which he knew was just around the corner. But inevitably, everything he did slipped through his grasp. His life was on a downward spiral. And as the years slipped by, so did the opportunities. He lived out his final years in Dublin in modest circumstances, in failing health and almost blind. Although Ireland had turned its back on him in life, when he died, what happened? He became a hero again. When he died, he was given a state funeral, 1965, full military honours, a distinction reserved only for those deemed to have given extraordinary service to the state. And this simply served to validate Fitz's embittered view of the country. Unfortunately, the country of his origin, which he had written some years previously. He said, "If you have the misfortune to do anything useful for Ireland, they do everything to destroy you. Then, when you are dead, they dig you up and laud your achievements as a bolster to their own mediocrity." Well, he uses powerful words right through, and Martin here has put them to music, these powerful words that he based his music on. In this flight, we have fought side by side with the hope that our attempt will bring greater goodwill and better understanding between the peoples of the earth. The history of civilization and progress has been based to a tremendous extent upon the development of communications and transportation. The radio, telegraph, television, telephoto, steamships, railways, automobiles and airplanes are forging communication links between nations that envoys and foreign chancellors will find difficult to break through petty political quarrels and personal greed. Now, that is the introduction to Martin's epilogue. Thank you.
That was absolutely amazing, Martin. Thank you very much.